By Special Episode X13, The Reality of Journalism. Hi listeners. My name is Aria. I'm taking over for this new round of special episodes. The author felt we needed a little softness in this brutal world. Seriously though, let's dive right into the heart of the matter. No grammar drills today, no vocabulary flashcards. Just you and me. We're going to talk through something that affects every single one of us, whether we want to or not. Today we are pulling back the curtain on an industry that claims to be the watchdog of democracy, the media. In this special episode, we examine the machinery of journalism, its lofty ideals, its historical pillars, and the systemic, economic, and ethical realities that frequently compromise its integrity. At its core, journalism is defined by the systematic gathering, assessment, and distribution of news and information verified for public consumption. Often referred to as the Fourth Estate, classical journalistic theory views the press as an independent check on government, corporate power, and societal institutions. The expression itself is old. It's generally traced back to the 18th century, to the Anglo-Irish statesman Edmund Burke, who is said to have described parliamentary reporters sitting in the gallery of the House of Commons as more powerful than the three officially recognized estates of the realm combined, the Lords Spiritual, the Lords Temporal, and the Commons, broadly corresponding to the clergy, the nobility, and the common people. The 19th century writer Thomas Carlyle popularized the phrase decades later, though historians still debate whether Burke ever actually said it. Some credit other figures, like the politician Henry Brougham or the historian Thomas Macaulay, with coining it independently around the 1820s. True or not, the label stuck, and it captures something real. The press was imagined, from the very start, as an unofficial fourth pillar of power, answerable to the public rather than to the crown. But an ideal is not a rulebook, and journalism didn't wait for institutions to try turning that ideal into concrete practice. In the United States, a group of student journalists founded what would become the Society of Professional Journalists in 1909. Originally as a college fraternity called Sigma Delta Chi, it took the organization until 1926 to adopt a formal code of ethics, and its own independent code only arrived in 1973. A reminder that good journalism had to be defined and redefined generation after generation, not handed down fully formed. The fundamental mandate, though, is straightforward: provide citizens with accurate, objective, and verifiable facts so they can navigate public life and hold power accountable. In theory, a journalist's ultimate allegiance is to the truth and to the public interest. To sustain these standards, specialized academic institutions emerged to professionalize the field. Globally recognized programs, such as the Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism, the Missouri School of Journalism, and France's Centre de Formation de Journalistes, CFJ, train reporters in rigorous source verification, investigative methodology, legal ethics, and editorial independence. These schools didn't all appear at once, and their origins are worth knowing. The Missouri School of Journalism, founded in 1908 by Walter Williams, is widely credited as the first formal journalism school in the world, built on what's still called the Missouri Method. Students learn by producing real news for a real newspaper, the Columbia Missourian, from their very first day of class. Columbia's school opened a few years later, in 1912, funded by the press magnate Joseph Pulitzer, who had first proposed the idea back in 1892 but died before seeing it open. His name now endures through the Pulitzer Prizes, which the school has administered since 1917. France's own CFJ has a very different origin story. It was founded in Paris on July 11, 1946, right after the liberation, by two former members of the French resistance group Défense de la France, Philippe Vianney and Jacques Richet, who wanted to train a new generation of journalists for a free press rebuilt from the ashes of the occupation. It's now one of around 15 schools officially recognized by the French journalism profession. These institutions teach that a verified fact is sacred, and that rumors must never replace evidence. They serve as the intellectual guardians of the trade, setting the baseline for what professional journalism is supposed to embody. Throughout modern history, independent journalism has achieved monumental breakthroughs. Major publications like the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Guardian, and Le Monde have carved out legacies through fearless reporting. Landmark historical events demonstrate this power. In June 1971, the New York Times began publishing the Pentagon Papers, a leaked internal Pentagon study showing that successive U.S. administrations had misled the public about the scale and prospects of the Vietnam War. The source was a former military analyst named Daniel Ellsberg. When the government obtained a court injunction to stop the Times from publishing further installments, the Washington Post picked up the story and kept going, and the case went all the way to the Supreme Court, which ultimately sided with the press in favor of the public's right to know. A year later, in June 1972, 5 men were arrested breaking into the Democratic National Committee's offices at the Watergate complex in Washington. 2 young Washington Post reporters, Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, spent 2 years pulling on that thread, and their reporting helped expose a much larger scheme of political sabotage and cover-up that reached the Oval Office itself. President Richard Nixon resigned in August 1974, the only U.S. president ever to do so. More recently, in April 2016, a much larger and more international story broke: the Panama Papers. 2 journalists at the German newspaper Süddeutsche Zeitung, Bastian Obermeier and Frederick Obermeier, received a leak of more than 11 million documents from a Panamanian law firm, Mossack Fonseca, detailing how politicians, celebrities, and criminals around the world used offshore companies to hide money and dodge taxes. Rather than publish alone, the paper shared the files through the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, and more than 370 reporters across roughly 80 countries worked on the story together for a year before publishing simultaneously, an entirely different, collaborative model of investigative journalism that simply wasn't possible before the internet. The investigation later won a Pulitzer Prize. These organizations proved, time and again, that a free press can alter the course of nations and protect democratic accountability. Yet, the structural economics of the media have undergone a seismic collapse over the past few decades. The numbers tell their own story. According to the Pew Research Center, total estimated daily newspaper circulation in the United States, print and digital combined, fell to around 20.9 million in 2022, down from roughly 50.7 million back in 2007, less than half in about 15 years. Weekday circulation alone dropped 8% in just 1 year, from 2021 to 2022. And it isn't only circulation. Research from Northwestern University's Medill School found that the United States lost close to 2,900 local newspapers and around 43,000 journalism jobs between 2005 and 2023, leaving entire counties with barely any dedicated local news coverage at all, a phenomenon researchers now call news deserts. Meanwhile, digital advertising revenue has consolidated into a handful of tech platforms that now capture most of the money once spent on newspaper and broadcast advertising. To survive, newsrooms transitioned from subscription-funded models to click-driven, attention economy metrics. In this environment, speed supersedes accuracy. Headlines are engineered for emotional resonance and maximum engagement rather than nuance. Truth becomes flexible, shaped to satisfy specific ideological demographics, political factions, or corporate sponsors who demand high viewership metrics at all costs. When financial survival depends on outrage and sensationalism, ethical boundaries dissolve entirely. The modern media landscape frequently crosses into outright fabrication, unverified social media rumors repackaged as breaking news, and aggressive invasions of personal privacy. A glaring historical precedent is the British phone hacking scandal involving the News of the World, a 168-year-old Sunday tabloid owned by Rupert Murdoch. In July 2011, it emerged that journalists working for the paper had illegally intercepted the voicemail of Millie Dowler, a 13-year-old girl who had gone missing in 2002 and was later found to have been murdered, and had even deleted some of her messages, which briefly gave her family false hope that she was still alive. The public outrage was so intense that Murdoch shut the paper down within days, publishing its final edition on July 10, 2011 under the headline, "Thank You and Goodbye." News International later paid roughly £2 million to the Dowler family, and the scandal led to a major public inquiry into press ethics, the Leveson Inquiry, later that same year. But the dark side of journalism isn't only about crossing legal lines against outsiders, it's sometimes about lying to your own readers. In 2003, the New York Times was forced to publish a lengthy front-page confession after discovering that one of its own reporters, Jason Blair, had fabricated quotes, invented scenes he never witnessed, and plagiarized other newspapers' work in dozens of stories over several years. He resigned, senior editors eventually stepped down over the fallout, and the episode remains one of the most cited case studies in journalism schools about how ambition, poor oversight, and pressure to produce copy quickly can quietly corrode a newsroom's most basic promise to its readers, that what it prints actually happened. Beyond these individual scandals, standard sensationalist reporting routinely ruins reputations, traumatizes innocent individuals, and destroys livelihoods based on premature conclusions, all before a court of law can establish any facts. Even when individual investigative reporters strive to expose systemic corruption, structural barriers frequently shut them down. Modern media outlets are rarely independent entities, they operate as subsidiaries of massive multinational conglomerates, rely heavily on multi-million-dollar corporate advertising contracts, or depend on political patrons. A striking illustration surfaced in 2018 when Sinclair Broadcast Group, then the largest owner of local television stations in the United States with roughly 190 to 200 outlets, required dozens of local news anchors across the country to read an identical scripted editorial about biased and false news, presented as if it were each anchor's own personal opinion. When a compilation video stitching together the near-identical broadcasts went viral, it laid bare just how much editorial control a single corporate owner could exert over newsrooms that audiences assumed were independent and purely local. Several anchors later said they were uncomfortable reading the script but felt they had little choice. When an investigative piece threatens the financial interests of parent companies, major advertisers, or influential stakeholders, the investigation is routinely stalled, heavily edited, or permanently killed. Editorial independence consistently yields to corporate survival and profit margins. Given that the modern information ecosystem is driven by financial incentives, political alignment, and sensationalism, absolute reliance on any single media source is a critical vulnerability. The ultimate defense against manipulation rests entirely with the individual consumer. Navigating today's media landscape requires active skepticism, cross-referencing claims across independent, ideologically diverse sources, examining who funds the reporting, and resisting emotional manipulation. It's worth knowing that entire organizations now exist purely to help with that verification work. In 2015, the Poynter Institute in the United States launched the International Fact-Checking Network, which now connects more than 170 independent fact-checking organizations worldwide under a shared code of principles, and which several major social media platforms rely on to flag disputed claims. Groups like these don't replace a reader's own judgment, but they're a useful second opinion when a headline feels engineered to provoke rather than to inform. Critical thinking is no longer an academic skill. It is an absolute necessity for anyone who wishes to maintain an independent mind in a world of manufactured consent. Key vocabulary and expressions explained. Watchdog. Definition: a person or organization that closely monitors the actions of powerful institutions to prevent wrongdoing. Example: the press is often described as the watchdog of democracy. Fourth estate. Definition: a traditional name for the press, treated as an unofficial fourth pillar of power alongside the clergy, the nobility, and the commoners. Example: reporters have belonged to the so-called fourth estate since the 18th century. To hold someone accountable. Definition: to make a person or institution answer for their actions and accept responsibility for the consequences. Example: a free press exists partly to hold politicians accountable for their decisions. Injunction. Definition: a court order that forbids a specific action, such as publishing certain information. Example: the government sought an injunction to stop the newspaper printing the leaked report. Leak, noun and verb. Definition: secret information that is deliberately passed on to the public, usually by an insider. Example: the Panama Papers began with a leak of millions of confidential documents. Source. Definition: a person, document, or organization that provides information to a journalist, sometimes on condition of anonymity. Example: the reporter refused to reveal her source, even under pressure. Fabrication. Definition: something invented and presented as though it were true, an outright lie dressed up as fact. Example: the scandal involved the fabrication of quotes that were never actually spoken. Plagiarism. Definition: copying someone else's words or ideas and presenting them as your own original work. Example: he was dismissed for plagiarism after lifting entire paragraphs from a rival newspaper. Sensationalism. Definition: presenting stories in a deliberately shocking or exaggerated way in order to provoke a strong reaction rather than to inform. Example: sensationalism might sell more papers, but it rarely serves the truth. To consolidate/consolidation. Definition: to combine several things into one, especially in business, so that fewer, larger entities end up controlling a market. Example: advertising revenue has consolidated into a handful of tech giants. News desert. Definition: a community, especially a local one, left with little or no access to reliable local news coverage. Example: entire counties have become news deserts since their local paper closed down. Editorial independence. Definition: the freedom of journalists and editors to report the news without interference from owners, advertisers, or political pressure. Example: editorial independence is often the first casualty when an outlet depends on a single advertiser. Fallout. Definition: the negative consequences or aftermath that follow a major event, especially a scandal. Example: Several senior editors resigned in the fallout from the scandal. Manufactured consent. Definition: a situation in which public opinion is deliberately shaped by those in power, often through the media, so that it appears freely formed. Example: critical thinking is one of the best defenses against manufactured consent. Skepticism. Definition: a doubting or questioning attitude toward claims that haven't yet been proven. Example: a healthy dose of skepticism means checking a claim before sharing it further. What are your thoughts on this? Please feel free to share your reactions, ideas, and requests in the comments section below. Let's keep this space welcoming and respectful of everyone's perspective. Keep boosting your English. Bye for now.
Ready to boost your English.